The evening light casts a long, golden shadow across my bedroom floor as I sit by the window, a chipped porcelain cup of tea cradled in my hands. Outside, the rain taps gently against the glass, like soft fingers drumming on a coffin. The photograph in front of me shows a girl no older than 19, me, dressed in a white veil and a frozen smile. My first day at St. Jude's Abbey. Today is my 72nd birthday, and I've spent much of it in silence, arranging old photos I once tried to forget. Some memories fade. Others rot in the mind like meat left too long in the sun. My name is Sister Mary of Divine Obedience, but once long ago, I was Margaret Ellen Duval, a girl with dreams, a heart full of questions, and no idea what awaited me behind cloistered walls. This is my confession. I grew up in the small town of Ashburn, tucked between rust-colored hills and forgotten by progress. Our house was nothing more than a clay hut with a straw roof and an earth floor. But my mother filled it with warmth, even as my father drained it with fear. My father, Anthony Duval, was a hard man, a man who feared God loudly and beat silence into his children. He'd quote scripture as if it were a weapon, spare the rod, spoil the child. He'd shout before tearing into my brothers with his belt. When it was my turn, he simply looked at me with cold disgust, as if I were already a disappointment. My mother, Eleanor, never spoke against him. She'd lower her head and whisper prayers beneath her breath, as if her murmured faith could shield us. She washed laundry for townspeople, her hands always red from scrubbing, her back bent from years of labor. But her eyes were soft, and it was those eyes I trusted more than any sermon. Our lives revolved around the church. Father Benedict, the town priest, was a towering figure, with silver hair and skin like dry parchment. Everyone revered him, except me. Something about his eyes made my stomach knot. Too still, too cold. Like a hunter watching prey. I was 19 when everything changed. His name was Edward Langley, the son of the town's apothecary. He had a lopsided grin, fingers stained from ink and herbs, and a voice that made even the dullest hymns sound like poetry. I first saw him at the Harvest Festival, where he played the violin near the cider booth. I was standing with my friend Beth, pretending not to stare. He asked me to dance. I said yes. We twirled beneath the stars while my heart beat like a trapped bird in my chest. It was innocent. But innocence is fragile in the hands of the devout. Tony, the nephew of Father Benedict, saw us. He whispered, then shouted, and by the next day the entire town was humming with gossip. Margaret Duval, disgracing herself in public. A girl of God, behaving like a harlot. When I returned home, my father was waiting. He slapped me before I crossed the threshold. "You've ruined us," he spat. "Brought shame to this house." My mother sobbed quietly in the corner. The next morning, Father Benedict arrived with a steaming mug of tea and a chilling pronouncement. "Margaret has a calling." I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. I wanted to teach children, to marry Edward, to live simply and freely. But Father Benedict's voice thundered with certainty. "She will join the Sisters of Divine Providence in Montana. There, she will be purified." My father agreed instantly. My mother, she just wept. A quiet, hollow weeping that sounded like surrender. 7 days later, I was gone. The journey to Montana was long, cold, and disorienting. I'd never been beyond the county line before. I remember gripping the cracked leather seat of the old pickup that drove me to the train station. My knuckles white with fear. The world outside the window blurred past. Cornfields, rusty barns, forgotten churches. Every mile felt like a nail driven into the coffin of my old life. At the train station, Edward was waiting. He had heard from Beth. He stood beneath the platform clock, soaked in rain, holding a folded piece of paper in his hands. His eyes were red. "Don't go," he said simply. I wanted to scream, to fall into his arms and beg him to steal me away. But I couldn't. My father's voice echoed in my mind like thunder. "You brought shame. Now you'll make it right." I took the paper from Edward. It was a poem he had written for me. I still have it. Yellowed now, creased 100 times over. The ink smudged where my tears had fallen. "Wait for me," he whispered. I nodded. But he never would. And I never came back. The train ride was 5 days of motion and silence. The nuns who traveled with me were cold and mechanical, speaking only in clipped whispers. We weren't treated as people, but as parcels being delivered to some holy destination. On the 4th night, a younger girl named Isabel wept in her seat. The eldest nun slapped her without hesitation. "There is no crying in the Lord's work," she snapped. "Only discipline." I knew then that mercy had no home in the place we were going. When we arrived at St. Jude's Abbey, it was late. The abbey stood like a fortress carved from gray stone, surrounded by forest. The air was thick with pine and fog. I remember the iron gates creaking as we entered, and the cold settling into my bones. Inside, everything smelled of old wax, mildew and fear. The first night, we were stripped of our clothes and scrubbed with freezing water. Our hair was cut to the scalp. Mine, once long and black, fell to the stone floor like the petals of a dying flower. I watched a part of myself disappear, and didn't even cry. We were issued identical brown habits, rough wool that scratched the skin raw, and then we were given our new names. I ceased to be Margaret. I became Sister Mary of Divine Obedience. They told us we were reborn, but it felt more like we had died. The next morning, we were woken at 4 a.m. by the tolling of a bell. No words, just the bell. A long, low clang that vibrated in your teeth. We kneeled on cold stone floors for prayer, then cleaned the abbey halls in silence. Breakfast was a slice of dry bread and a cup of diluted milk. Then came more prayers. Then lessons. Then silence. Always silence. Closed mouths catch no sin, said Sister Angelica, the Mother Superior. Her face was sharp, her skin pale as salt, her hands bony and rigid. She walked the corridors like a ghost with a ruler. There were 27 girls, some as young as 14, some already broken. Their eyes avoided contact. Their hands trembled when they reached for things. No one spoke unless spoken to. Even then it was with fear. One girl, Anna, stuttered when she was asked to recite a psalm. Sister Angelica struck her across the mouth and said, "God only listens to clarity." Anna bled from the lip and said nothing. That night, I cried quietly into my thin pillow, afraid someone would hear. The days at St. Jude's blurred into each other like identical prayers whispered into a void. There was no calendar, no way to mark time except by seasons we glimpsed briefly through the high windows of the chapel. Summer meant hotter air in our stone cells. Winter meant our hands bled from the cold as we cleaned the floors. Each morning began with the same clang of the bell, the same whispered prayers, the same silent work. There were no clocks, no mirrors, no names. They erased you slowly. At first, I thought the silence would be the hardest part. But soon I realized that it wasn't the silence that destroyed us. It was the way they twisted God into something terrifying. He wasn't love in this place. He was a weapon, a watcher, a punisher. Sister Angelica often said, "There are no secrets here. The Lord sees all." But it wasn't the Lord who listened behind doors. Confession was mandatory every Wednesday. We were expected to report even our thoughts. If you dreamed of your mother, you confessed. If you felt warmth while thinking of home, you confessed. If you missed someone, anyone, you confessed. I made the mistake of saying I miss my brothers. The next day, I was summoned to Sister Angelica's office. Her eyes were sharp and glittering behind thick glasses. "Missing the world is rebellion," she said. "And rebellion is the seed of possession." She took out a wooden paddle. I was instructed to kneel. The pain wasn't the worst part. It was the way she smiled while delivering each blow. Not joyfully, not cruelly, but with religious certainty, as if my pain was part of some divine cleansing. Later, as I limped back to my cell, Rosa, a girl with sunken cheeks and ash-colored hair, slipped beside me in the hallway. "They listen," she whispered. "Even in the confessional. They record your sins and use them later." I stared at her. "Why?" Rosa didn't answer. She just looked over her shoulder and vanished into the stairwell. I was assigned to work in the laundry cellar, where giant copper tubs steamed with boiling water. The air smelled of lye, damp wool, and skin. I worked beside Sister Miriam, a silent woman who never looked up, and an older novice named Agnes, whose fingers were blistered raw from scrubbing. Once, as we folded linens, I saw something horrifying. A brown robe, ripped at the collar, stained with blood. Before I could speak, Sister Miriam snatched it from my hands and tossed it into the furnace. "No questions," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "Not here." I began to watch more closely. There were girls who arrived one day, and then vanished the next. One, Lucia, was only 15. She had been caught sneaking a letter to her younger sister. That night, we heard her scream. The next day, her bed was empty. Her name was never spoken again. I asked Rosa where she went. She only said, "Downstairs." "What's downstairs?" I asked. Rosa stared into her hands. "The place where God never sleeps." That phrase haunted me. I started paying attention to the routines. When the sisters moved, which doors they locked, and which they never opened. There was one door, beneath the east stairwell, marked only with a brass crucifix and a keyhole the size of a coin. No one ever went through it during the day. But sometimes at night, I heard it creak open. And when it did, Something cold crawled through the hallways, like the breath of something ancient. One night, Rosa and I were ordered to clean the infirmary. The infirmary was always locked. That night it wasn't. Inside, a girl lay strapped to a bed, her wrists bound in leather. Her mouth was gagged. Her eyes darted wildly around the room. Her name was Sister Noel. I recognized her. She had once told me she had dreams of fire and shadows, and had shared stories from her childhood before they punished her for fantasy. Now she was sedated, covered in bruises. Rosa leaned close and whispered, "This is what happens when you ask questions." I couldn't speak. My tongue felt nailed to the roof of my mouth. We cleaned around her body. No one explained. No one acknowledged. As we left, Sister Angelica appeared in the doorway, holding a leather-bound Bible. "She is being purified," she said softly. "Pray she is strong enough." I didn't sleep that night. I knew then. This place wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap. Weeks passed. Then months. I stopped marking time. My body became mechanical. Prayer, scrub, silence, fear. Prayer, scrub, silence, fear. On repeat. I began to lose my sense of self. I forgot my voice, my favorite color, my dreams. I even started to forget Edward's face. That frightened me most of all. Then something changed. A new girl arrived. Her name was Celeste. She was bold, too bold. She questioned everything. She spoke during meals, asked why we had to kneel so long, asked what was behind the locked doors. She was brave in a way I had forgotten was possible. But bravery has a price. 2 weeks after her arrival, we were woken in the middle of the night by screaming. It wasn't human. It was hollow, shredded. Then silence. In the morning, Celeste's bed was gone. Her belongings vanished. Her name removed from the registry. I asked Sister Miriam what happened. She said, "She walked too close to the devil." I asked Rosa. She said, "She found the room under the crucifix." That was when I made my decision. I needed to see what was behind that door. The keyhole beneath the crucifix haunted me. Every time I passed it, I felt a cold draft, like something breathing behind the wall. Rosa warned me to forget it. She said curiosity was the devil's invitation. But I couldn't. Not after Celeste. Not after Noel. Not after the robe stained with blood. I needed to see what they were hiding. It took me 3 weeks to find the key. It wasn't hidden behind a painting or under a floorboard. It was around the neck of Father Anselm, the confessor, a squat man with eyes like whetstone and hands that always seemed too eager to rest on young shoulders. He wore the key beneath his robes on a chain. I noticed it during a confession, when I knelt and dared to peek upward as he adjusted his collar. It shimmered like polished bone. So I waited. On the last Wednesday of the month, Father Anselm fell asleep in the sacristy. He often drank secretly, sips of sacramental wine that stained his breath. That day, after confession, I lingered behind, pretending to scrub the floor. He leaned back in the wooden chair, snoring softly. I approached, heart pounding like thunder, and gently unhooked the chain from around his neck. He stirred but didn't wake. The key was surprisingly warm in my hand, as if it remembered every door it had ever opened. That night, I didn't sleep. I clutched the key beneath my habit like a relic. I waited until 2 a.m., the time when the abbey was at its stillest, when even the ghosts seemed tired. I crept out of my cell barefoot, past the chapel and the long rows of sleeping girls, down the east stairwell to the door under the crucifix. I held my breath as the key slid into the lock. It turned with a soft click. The door creaked open, and darkness swallowed me whole. The staircase beyond was steep, spiraling downward like a well. The stone walls were wet. I gripped the iron railing and descended slowly, counting steps to calm my nerves. 10, 20, 40. At the bottom was another door, this one heavier, made of iron with 3 bolts. One was already unlocked. The others took effort, but they moved. When I pushed it open, the smell hit me first. Rot, dampness, and something sharp, like rusted metal. The chamber beyond wasn't what I expected. It was clean, not sterile, but orderly. Candles lined the walls. Rows of wooden pews faced a raised altar. There was a crucifix, but instead of Christ's figure, there was a blank, blackened space, as if someone had carved him out. Behind the altar stood something that chilled me. A chair. No, not a chair. A throne, made of twisted wood and iron, with strap. I stepped closer, trembling. The room pulsed with wrongness. This wasn't a chapel. It was a ritual chamber. And someone had used it recently. There were fresh burn marks on the stone. The scent of incense mixed with blood. And a long, curved staff leaned against the wall, topped with a symbol I didn't recognize. A sun, with an eye in the center. My heart pounded. I turned to leave, and froze. There were drawings on the walls. Children. Young girls. Crying, praying, screaming. Some were chained. Some were kneeling. One was suspended upside down. The images were rough, frantic, as if scratched in by desperate hands. My stomach turned. That's when I heard the whisper. At first, I thought it came from my own mind. But then I heard it again. A hiss, soft and guttural. Stay. I spun around. No one. But the room had changed. The candles burned lower. The air grew thick, almost liquid. My lungs felt heavy. My knees buckled. And then I saw her. She was standing behind the throne. A girl, maybe 13. Her habit hung off her thin frame like a sack. Her eyes were huge, sunken, glowing faintly in the candlelight. Her mouth didn't move, but I heard her voice. They used me here. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came. Don't let them do it again. She stepped toward me. I stepped back. Her bare feet made no sound on the stone. Burn it. Then she vanished. Gone. The candles flickered out. I ran. I stumbled up the stairs, banging my knees and elbows, scraping my palms. When I reached the hallway, I slammed the door shut and twisted the key until the lock screamed. I kept running, until I collapsed outside the chapel, shaking, drenched in sweat. That morning, I told Rosa. Her face drained of color. You saw her? I nodded. She whispered. That was Isabel. I froze. Isabel died 2 years ago. They said she ran away. But she didn't. She found the room too. That night I didn't sleep. My dreams were filled with the chamber. The throne. The drawings. The girl. Isabel. Something inside me cracked. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The next morning, during morning prayer, I stood. I stood while the others kneeled. While Sister Angelica read scripture. And I spoke. I saw the room. The entire chapel went silent. All heads turned. Angelica's face froze. I saw what you do there, I said louder now. I saw her. Isabel. She told me to burn it. Sister Angelica stepped forward slowly, her eyes burning. Silence, she hissed. No more silence, I said. And that was when it began. They dragged me from the chapel. They locked me in my cell. I wasn't allowed food or water. They called it fasting. They called it spiritual discipline. But I knew it was punishment. I was left alone for 5 days. 5 days in darkness, with only whispers. Not in my head. Real whispers. From the walls. From below. And on the 6th day, I felt her again. A hand on mine. Cold. Light. And then, the door opened. It was Rosa. She stood there, eyes wide with fear. We're leaving, she said. She had the keys. And a plan. We ran. Through the chapel, through the courtyard, over the wall. Into the forest. We ran until our lungs gave out. And I never went back. We ran until the stars disappeared. The forest felt endless, branches clawing at our skin like angry hands. Rosa held my arm the whole time, whispering prayers under her breath. I didn't speak. My voice had vanished somewhere in that dark chamber, beneath the crucifix. When we finally collapsed near a crumbled wall of an old stone shrine, our lungs burned and our legs barely held us. It was dawn. Pale light bled through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I saw the sky. It didn't comfort me. What happens now? I asked. Rosa didn't answer. She just stared ahead, face pale and eyes hollow. I can't go back, I said. You won't, she whispered. They'll lie. Say you were possessed. Say you seduced a priest. Say anything but the truth. I nodded. I already knew. They had done the same to Isabel. We found a road by midday. A farmer in a red truck stopped for us. He looked at our torn habits and bruised faces, said nothing, and drove us 20 miles without a word. I don't even remember his name, just the kindness in his silence. Rosa got off near a bus station. She took my hand and said, "Don't follow me. We'll be safer apart." I didn't argue. I never saw her again. I was 17, with nothing but a blood-stained habit, a memory that wouldn't let go, and a name I hadn't used in years, Claire. I used it again when I reached the city, Claire Fontaine. I worked in laundries, diners, even a bookstore. Slept in shelters, then in a cramped studio where the faucet always leaked. But I was free. That's what I told myself. Until the nightmares started. Every night, I saw the throne. Not always the same way, but always there. Sometimes it bled. Sometimes it burned. Sometimes it whispered my name. And sometimes, I saw other girls. Girls I had never met. Their eyes were always the same. hollow, pleading. I started writing everything down. Not just the dreams, memories, faces, voices, names, symbols, the twisted sun, the carved walls, the locked doors, and Isabel. Always Isabel. 5 years passed. The world changed. Phones, protests, new leaders, new wars. But inside me nothing changed. I was still in that stone chamber. One day, while walking past a bookshop window, I saw a title that froze my blood. The Blessed Silence. Inside the Lives of the Saint-Lumière Sisters. It was a glossy exposé, written by a journalist named Corinne Malbuck. I bought it, hands shaking. The book was full of lies. Smiling nuns, serene gardens, spiritual awakenings. It painted Saint-Lumière as a sacred refuge for troubled girls. No mention of the rituals. No mention of the throne. No mention of Isabel. But there was a photo that made me sit down on the sidewalk and cry. A girl maybe 16. Dark curls. A timid smile. Noelle. The one who never came back. The caption read, Sister Noelle, age 16, now traveling as a missionary in Peru. Noelle had never left the abbey. I had seen her robe, ripped bloody in the washroom. I had seen Sister Angelica praying over her bed with tears in her eyes. They had lied. Again. That night, I found Corinne Malbuck's office number in the back of the book. I called her. It rang 6 times. Malbuck, a voice answered. I need to tell you about Saint-Lumière, I said. The truth. The real truth. A pause. Then, meet me tomorrow. Noon. Café Dumas. She was younger than I expected. Maybe mid-30s, sharp eyes, clean notebook. I told her everything. It took 3 hours. She didn't interrupt. Just wrote, word after word, as if transcribing a sacred scripture. When I finished, she asked only one question. Do you have proof? I handed her my journal. Dozens of pages. Drawings. Names. Dates. She flipped through them, nodded slowly. Claire, she said, this story could burn the whole place down. I whispered, good. She published a series. 4 articles. Front page. The darkness beneath the abbey. The girls who vanished. The chamber of chains. Voices in the walls. It exploded. Some called me brave. Others called me insane. Saint-Lumière denied everything. The church called it slander. They said I was mentally unstable, that I had been expelled for disciplinary issues. But they couldn't erase the others. Because more girls came forward. Rosa, somehow, she had survived. She wrote anonymously. Another girl named Leah described the same throne. A third said she had seen Isabel in her dreams for years. The silence was cracking. Investigations followed. They found the chamber. Not fully intact, but real. The throne was gone, but burn marks and strange symbols were still there. Bones of animals. Chains. No bodies. No blood. Just echoes. But it was enough. Saint-Lumière was shut down. I thought I'd feel peace. I didn't. I felt empty, like something inside me had finally died. Something that had waited for justice. For redemption. For God. But there was no God in that house. There never had been. 10 years later, I received a letter. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single page. A drawing. Childish. Frantic. Of the throne. And next to it, a girl. Hair in braids. Hands raised. Eyes wide with fear. Underneath it, in shaky handwriting, she still waits. Years had passed since the exposé shattered the abbey's silence. I was no longer Sister Claire but just Claire Fontaine. A woman trying to stitch her broken pieces back together. Yet, every night, the shadows of Saint-Lumière clung to me. One evening, in a quiet cafe, I met Julien. He was nothing like the men I knew before. Gentle, patient, and with eyes that seemed to hold whole worlds of kindness. A writer, he said, chasing stories that mattered. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He never asked about the scars beneath my skin, or the past I tried to bury. His presence was a balm, soothing the ache I thought would never fade. But the past has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. Julien and I met by chance, though I sometimes wonder if fate had other plans. It was a rainy afternoon when I ducked into a small bookshop to escape the cold. He was there, behind the counter, wiping his glasses with a worn cloth. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of the world lifted. He asked my name. I told him Claire. He smiled. A beautiful name for a complicated story. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. Over the next weeks, our meetings became the moments I lived for. We wandered through city streets, sharing coffee and quiet conversations. I told him fragments of my past, careful not to drown him in darkness, but honest enough to bridge the gap between my silence and his understanding. Julian listened, not as a judge, but as a fellow traveler scarred by life's storms. One night, I shared the drawing I had received, the throne, the girl with wide eyes, and the chilling message. She still waits. Julian's fingers traced the lines on the paper gently. That drawing, he said softly. It's like a plea, a soul caught between worlds. I nodded, feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. Do you believe in ghosts? I asked him. He paused. I believe in memories that refuse to die, in pain that haunts the living. Maybe that's a kind of ghost. His words comforted me more than he knew. Our growing closeness awakened parts of me I thought were lost forever. I began to hope again, to dream of a life beyond fear and sorrow. But the shadows of Saint-Lumière were never far behind. One evening, after a walk in the park, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a single note. You cannot run from her. The words burned into my skin. I confided in Julian. His brow furrowed with concern, but he stood by me. We'll face this together, he promised. That night, I dreamed again of the chamber beneath the cross. But this time, Isabel was different. She reached out, not with fear, but with a fragile hope. Find peace, she whispered. Find love. I woke with tears. Slowly, I began to understand. The waiting was not just for justice, but for healing. For me. Months passed. Julian and I built a fragile sanctuary. A world where the past whispered but did not control. I still visited the ruins of Saint-Lumière when I could. I left wildflowers by the crumbled altar, hoping to offer a small prayer for those lost. One afternoon, while walking near the forest, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I saw a young woman, bright-eyed and gentle. I'm Leah, she said. I knew Isabel. We all waited for someone like you. Tears filled my eyes. Maybe, just maybe, the waiting was over. The days grew longer as spring edged into summer. With Julian by my side, the cold shadows that once clung to me began to loosen. But healing is never simple, and the past is a patient predator. I remember one afternoon vividly. We were sitting on a weathered bench beneath an old oak tree in the park. The sun filtered softly through the leaves, casting dancing patterns on the ground. Julian was reading aloud from a book of poetry, his voice steady and calm. I watched him. The way his fingers traced the lines, the faint crease in his brow when a verse touched something deep inside him. I wanted to tell him everything, but fear held my tongue. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the worn journal I'd kept since fleeing Saint-Lumière. I slid it across the bench. He opened it carefully, flipping through pages filled with hurried writing, shaky drawings, desperate pleas. He looked up, eyes searching mine. Claire, he said softly, this is more than a story. It's a life trapped between hope and despair. I swallowed hard. It's my life. That night, sleep was elusive. Memories surged like a tide, pulling me back to cold stone walls, whispered threats, and the hollow eyes of girls who had suffered too much. But then, amidst the darkness, there was a different memory. Julian's warmth, the sound of his laughter, the softness of his hand in mine. It was the first real comfort I'd known in years. Yet the past was not done with me. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, almost childlike. She watches. She waits. She never forgets. My breath caught. I showed it to Julian. His face hardened, protective and fierce. We need to be careful, he warned. This isn't just about ghosts or memories. Someone wants you afraid. I nodded, but fear wrapped around my heart like a cold chain. Despite the threat, I refused to retreat. With Julian's encouragement, I began to speak out, at community meetings, in support groups, even to reporters curious about the Saint-Lumière scandal's aftermath. Each time, I felt a little stronger. Each time, the whispers in my mind grew quieter. One evening, Julian invited me to his apartment for dinner. It was modest but cozy, filled with books and soft light. Over homemade soup and crusty bread, we talked, not about the past but about hopes. Do you believe in second chances? He asked, eyes warm and steady. I hesitated. I want to, I said. He smiled. Then let's build one. Together. In the weeks that followed, our bond deepened. We shared stolen moments in quiet cafes, long walks beneath stars, and the simple joy of being seen and loved. But even in love, the shadows lingered. There were nights I awoke drenched in sweat, haunted by dreams of the chamber beneath the cross. And there were days when I caught a glimpse of something, an indistinct figure watching from the edge of the forest, or a whisper barely heard on the wind. Still, Julian never faltered. One afternoon, as we sat by the river, he took my hands in his and said, "Whatever waits, whatever haunts you, you don't have to face it alone." Tears welled in my eyes. "I've spent so long waiting for peace," I whispered. "For forgiveness. For love." He kissed my forehead gently. "Then don't wait any longer." Months passed. The seasons turned. I found myself returning less and less to the ruins of Saint-Lumière. Instead, I built a new life, one filled with small miracles. A warm home, friends who understood, a man who loved me for all I was. Yet sometimes, when the night was still and the moon hung low, I would hear a faint voice calling. Not a voice of fear, but of hope. One evening, as Julian and I walked through the city square, a young woman approached us. Her eyes were bright, but there was a sadness there too. "I'm Leah," she said softly. "I was at Saint-Lumière too. I saw what you endured. We all did." I felt my heart swell. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled. "Isabel told us you would come." For the first time in decades, I felt the heavy weight lift. Perhaps the waiting was over. The arrival of Leah was a turning point. For years, I had believed I was alone in my suffering, but she was proof that I wasn't. We met often, sometimes in cafes, sometimes in quiet parks. Leah spoke little at first, but her eyes held stories as dark as mine. One afternoon, she pulled from her bag a small, frayed photograph, a group of girls in habits, smiling with forced joy beneath the abbey's ancient walls. "There were more of us," she whispered. "More than anyone knew." Her words settled like stones in my chest. As summer faded into autumn, Julian and I grew closer still. The simple acts of love, the shared meals, the quiet conversations, the gentle touches, were anchors in the storm of my past. One evening, as amber leaves drifted outside the window, Julian surprised me with a small wooden box. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace, a pendant shaped like a tiny open book. "For your stories," he said softly. "For your truth." I felt tears spill down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of hope. Yet the shadows of Saint-Lumière still whispered. One night, I woke to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. A woman cloaked in black, face obscured by shadow. My heart thundered. But as I blinked, she vanished like mist. I told Julian the next morning. He held me tight. "We'll face her," he promised. "Together." Weeks later, Leah confided a secret. She had returned to the abbey's ruins once more and found a hidden room beneath the chapel floor. Inside were journals, diaries of the girls who had suffered there, pages filled with fear, hope, and courage. Together, we read their words aloud, giving voice to those silenced for so long. With each story shared, the darkness lost its grip. The girls who had once waited in silence were finally heard. I realized then that healing was not forgetting, but remembering, with courage and love. One cold winter evening, Julian and I walked through the softly falling snow. He stopped, pulling me close. "Claire," he whispered, "I love you. All of you, past, present, and the future we can build." I looked into his eyes, feeling a warmth I had never known. "I love you too," I said. And for the first time, I believed it. Winter melted into spring, but some wounds refused to heal with the seasons. Julian and I had settled into a fragile happiness. Our apartment was modest, filled with books, plants, and the faint scent of lavender. My attempt to fill the spaces left empty by years of darkness. Yet every so often, the past reached out like a cold hand brushing my shoulder. One afternoon, as I prepared dinner, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was soft, hesitant. "Claire? It's Isabel's sister, Marianne." My breath caught. Marianne told me stories I had never heard. How Isabel had confided in her before disappearing. How she had feared the abbey more than death itself. "Please," Marianne pleaded. "Help me find the truth. For her." I promised. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed our conversations, wondering what else had been hidden. Days later, Marianne arrived at my door, clutching a small box. Inside were letters, handwritten, yellowed with age, written by Isabel herself. Her words painted a chilling picture. Secret meetings, hidden punishments, whispered prayers that were anything but holy. Reading them, I felt the weight of all those years settle heavier on my chest. Julian stood beside me as I read aloud. "We have to bring this to light," he said firmly. "The world deserves to know." But I hesitated. What if the world was not ready? What if this truth shattered more than it healed? Then came the nightmares again. Not the old, faceless fears, but vivid scenes of the abbey's chapel, where a single candle flickered in the dark. I saw a man, tall, cloaked, face hidden, whispering words in a language I did not understand. I woke with a start, heart pounding. Confused and frightened, I confided in Julian. He listened, then suggested something I hadn't considered. Maybe these aren't just memories, he said. Maybe there's something more. I looked at him, searching for certainty. Like what? Closure, he said. Maybe you need to face that place one last time. I resisted at first. The thought of returning to Saint-Lumière was unbearable. But with Julian's quiet encouragement, I agreed. We planned the trip carefully. I packed my journal, the letters from Isabel, and the pendant Julian had given me. Standing before the ruins, the wind whispered through cracked walls. The abbey was nothing like I remembered. The towering walls looked smaller, vulnerable in the daylight. But the air still carried weight, a heaviness that pressed against my chest. Inside the chapel, dust motes danced in stray beams of sunlight. I traced my fingers along the cracked altar, feeling the rough stone beneath my skin. Julian held my hand tightly. I'm here, he said. Together, we descended into the hidden room beneath the chapel floor. The chamber was cold and dark. Faint carvings decorated the walls, symbols I had seen in my dreams. I laid Isabel's letters on the stone table, reading them aloud once more. A strange calm settled over me. Suddenly, Julian's voice broke the silence. Look here. He pointed to a hidden niche in the wall. Inside lay a bundle of folded cloth, old, worn and stained. Carefully, I unfolded it. A rosary. Tears blurred my vision. I held it close. This was no longer just a place of pain. It was a place of remembrance. As we left the abbey, the sun broke through clouds. Light spilled across the ruins like a blessing. For the first time I felt hope, not just in words but in my bones. As we left the abbey's ruins behind, memories stirred inside me. Memories I had long tried to bury. I thought of my father, Mr. Anthony Peterson, whose fierce hand and louder voice had once ruled our home like a storm. He was a man convinced that fear was the path to order, and his words were law, harsh, unyielding. I remembered the nights when my mother, Eleanor, would sit quietly in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she whispered, God is watching, hoping to shield us from his wrath. The years I spent at Saint-Lumière were not just an escape from the abbey, but from the torment within my family. Yet, despite all the pain, my mother's love had been a fragile light in the darkness, the one warmth I clung to. One evening, as Julian and I sat by the fire, I confessed to him the guilt I carried. I never forgave my father, I said. His violence, his cruelty. I hated the man who was supposed to protect me. Julian listened, holding my hand. But what about your mother? She loved us, I whispered. But she was powerless, afraid. The weight of those memories pressed on me, a reminder of the tangled roots that shaped who I was. But I knew, for the first time, that I could begin to untangle them. The nights were often the hardest. Lying awake beside Julian, I wrestled with memories, sharp and unyielding, that clawed at my mind like restless ghosts. My father's booming voice, the crack of his belt, the cold fury in his eyes. How many times had I prayed for mercy that never came? And my mother, her soft tears, the way she would press her lips together, pretending strength while crumbling inside. I realized then that my pain was not just from the abbey's horrors, but the silent suffering of my childhood. With Julian's gentle presence, I dared to speak aloud what had long been locked inside. I hated him. I confessed one night, voice trembling. I hated my father for the man he was, and for the fear he planted in me. Julian squeezed my hand. But you also loved him, didn't you? I nodded slowly. I wanted his approval. I wanted to be enough. Together, we began to untangle the twisted threads of my past. Julian encouraged me to write letters, to my father, to my mother, even if they would never be sent. Writing became a form of release, a way to face the shadows that haunted me. One letter read, Father, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. Another, Mother, your love saved me when nothing else could. Each word peeled away layers of grief, revealing strength beneath. The road to healing was long, marked by setbacks and tears, but I was no longer walking it alone. Julian's love was the steady light guiding me through. The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains, painting golden streaks across our small living room. Julian was already at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming gently before him, the quiet hum of the city waking outside. I sat down beside him, clutching my worn journal, a repository of my pain, my memories, and slowly my hopes. Tell me, Julian said, his eyes warm and patient. What does healing look like to you? I hesitated, searching for words. Like untangling a knot. I whispered. Some strands are fragile, others stubborn, but each one connects to the whole. I have to be gentle, but persistent. Julian smiled, reaching out to hold my hand. We'll untangle it together. Days turned into weeks. I found solace in routine, writing, walks with Julian, moments of quiet reflection. Yet some mornings brought waves of despair. One such morning, I stared at my reflection, lines etched deeper, eyes hollow with fatigue. The weight of years bore down on me. But then I remembered my mother's quiet strength, the way she endured without losing herself completely, and my father's harshness, a shadow I refused to let define me. With renewed resolve, I wrote another letter. I am not who you made me to be. I am who I choose to become. Julian surprised me one evening with a small gathering of friends. Their kindness, laughter, and acceptance filled the room like light spilling into a dark chamber. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, not as a victim, but as a woman reborn. But healing is not linear. There were moments when the past crashed back like a storm. Flashbacks that stole my breath. Nightmares that shattered sleep. Julian was my anchor, steady and unwavering. When I faltered, he reminded me, "You are stronger than you know." One day, we visited the garden where my mother used to grow her herbs and flowers. The earth was rich and alive, bursting with colors and scents. I knelt, planting a small rose bush, a symbol of new beginnings. Julian stood beside me, his hand warm on my back. "This rose will grow," he said softly, "just like you." The journey was far from over, but for the first time, I believed in the possibility of peace. The crisp autumn air bit gently at my cheeks as Julian and I approached the courthouse. My heart pounded, not from the cold, but from the weight of what was to come. For decades, the horrors of Saint-Lumière had been buried beneath silence and fear. But now, armed with testimonies, letters, and a relentless thirst for justice, we were ready to face the world. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters, survivors, and curious onlookers filled the seats. When it was my turn to speak, I stepped forward, clutching my journal tightly. Looking out, I saw not just strangers, but faces that mirrored pain, resilience, and hope. I began recounting my story, my childhood shadowed by my father's wrath and my mother's quiet love, the cruel confinement at the abbey, the sisterhood broken by betrayal and secrecy. As I spoke, tears streamed freely, but with every word, the chains of silence shattered. Then came the revelations. Names of those who had hidden behind sacred robes yet wielded cruelty with impunity. Whispers turned into gasps. Some faces paled, others clenched fists in anger. After the hearing, survivors embraced, tears mingling with smiles. Justice was far from guaranteed, but truth had found a voice. Later, as Julian and I walked beneath a sky heavy with stars, I felt a peace I never thought possible. "We did it," I whispered. He smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. "More than that, we freed ourselves." The courtroom battles faded into the past, replaced by quieter days filled with purpose and healing. I found solace not only in Julian's love, but in the friendships forged with other survivors. Women and men who carried scars as deep as mine, but refused to let them define their futures. Each morning, I woke with gratitude, for the breath in my lungs, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the promise of another day. I returned to the garden my mother once tended, where the rose bush had flourished, its blossoms vibrant and strong. I knelt beside it, fingers tracing petals soft as forgiveness. The past had carved deep lines in my soul, but it no longer held me captive. I was free. Julian stood beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder. "We are survivors," he said, "and our story is one of hope." I looked into his eyes, steady, kind, and unwavering. "Thank you for walking with me through the darkness," I whispered. He smiled. "And thank you for letting me." The night sky stretched wide above us, filled with countless stars, each a reminder that even in the darkest night, light endures. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, I stepped forward into the dawn of a new life. If my story has touched you, I invite you to leave a comment. Your voice deserves to be heard, your story has power, and the truth needs to be shared, even if it shakes someone's beliefs. Every comment you share adds another voice to our chorus, showing that we are not alone in this fight. Please like this message so it can reach others who need it, those who may feel loss as deeply as I once did. And please subscribe to the channel, because every story told is another brick in the wall of truth. And together we can kindle a flame of hope rising from the ashes of the past. I am Grace M. Peterson, and this is my testimony of a faith that liberates, not imprisons. Thank you for listening.